All right, fellow quarantiners, we're back for another episode of Watch and Listen. I'm Mike here with Cameron, my co-host. Cameron, how you doing out there?
I'm doing well.
All right, this is going to be an interesting episode, as all episodes are interesting, but we're talking specifically about watches in situations like we are in right now, in quarantine situations, in doomsday situations, in situations where you have extreme conditions and climates and things like that. So we decided to do this episode because we're all doing pretty okay. Like, this is a terrible thing, but obviously there aren't like massive wars and like doomsday types of scenarios where we have to like fight for each other and fight for our lives here. But in the event that there is something like that, we wanted to do an episode about watches that you should wear during times like that. Am I correct?
yeah, yeah. It's a kind of a funny topic, I think. But for me, when I was a kid, this was one of the things I thought about when I collected watches.
No kidding.
Like, what do I want to have with me if I get stuck somewhere, or something crazy happens? It was just in my imagination as a child for some reason, and that had a lot to do with the types of watches I liked as a kid.
Okay. All right. Well, that's kind of weird and at the same time very interesting. So let's talk about that. How did that come to fruition? Like, where was this fear, or was it a fear, or was this just like preparation or like preparedness?
No, not a fear at all. It was more of just trying to be prepared.
Okay.
And I was really fascinated with watches. It was a big part of my life as a kid. So if certain people might be thinking, well, what kind of automobile do I want to have, or what kind of pocket knife do I want to have? Should I always carry a compass and a lighter? Things like that. And I was always thinking, what watch is going to be on my wrist?
Okay. Well, let's do some background here. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in San Diego and Seattle.
Okay. So San Diego, Seattle, two really rough and tumble places.
Yes.
So where'd this come to this whole thing of like preparedness come from? Because yeah, they're two metropolises really.
Well, I was always an outdoor kid. I was not inside playing video games or doing what you'd think city folks would be doing.
Okay.
I was out. I don't know if you can hear that heavy breathing. I've got Bennett over here.
Of course.
But I was always either at the beach in San Diego, or in the canyons down there, or up in Seattle. It'd be in the woods, and the woods there are unbelievable.
In Seattle, yeah, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Cascades and then Olympic National Forest. You're really on all sides surrounded by mountains and forests and rivers and all kinds of outdoor entertainment.
And volcanoes.
Yeah.
Recently erupted volcanoes, by the way. I've been watching a lot of really strange television because obviously when you're quarantined, you don't really have much to do other than maybe watch some TV or do something that'll take your mind off of this whole thing. So I went on this binge of volcanoes. So there's a big volcano right next to Seattle. So that was interesting. But anyway, let's digress.
So I think that brings me to my first watch that I really, really wanted as a kid. I was never able to afford it. It was the Casio Pathfinder.
Okay.
And that watch was decked out with functions.
Okay.
Barometer, altimeter, all these things that I didn't even really know what they did, but I wanted to have them in a watch.
Okay. All right. So I'm writing this down because what we're gonna do is we're gonna like impose this later. We're basically gonna do a screenshot of it. So talk to me more about this because it's funny because I actually made a list of watches that I thought were really great watches for doomsday scenarios, and one of them is a Casio, but it's not a Pathfinder. I've actually never heard of a Pathfinder because for me, like when I was a kid growing up, like quartz watches and digital watches weren't really my thing. I remember like in junior high school, the whole Baby Shock era was kind of happening. Like everyone had a Baby G, and they were all these like very very interesting colors like purples and light blues and things like that. I never got into that. I was the only kid wearing like an analog watch. It was a Citizen, basically. So tell me about this Pathfinder. Like what kind of like obviously it sounds like it's got a bunch of different features and that's what attracted you to it. But tell me more.
If you're an outdoorsman, that's a wonderful watch to have. expensive if I remember correctly. In the scheme of fine watches, inexpensive, but for a kid at that point, I think it was a $700 watch.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
Five to $700, I think was the range. We'd have to look that up now to see what it actually is, but it was pricey for my piggy bank at that point. So, which is why I never got my hands on one of those.
Okay. Well, while you're talking about it, let's see if we can actually pull up a Casio Pathfinder here. So Pathfinder, right?
Yeah,
Okay. Let's see if we can pull it up. We do have the interweb still available to us. So it's a G-Shock basically, but it's well, no, actually, no, it's not. Okay, it looks kind of like a Garmin, like a modern day Garmin almost, right?
yeah. I mean,
This looks like something a Navy SEAL would wear.
yeah, exactly. It's hard for me to see the pictures. They're a little pixelated on my screen right now. But yeah, it has all kinds of functions. It's a little computer on your wrist, basically, for navigation and, like I said, weather, altitude, all sorts of things that you might find you want to know if you were
Right.
outdoors, maybe
Right.
stuck somewhere, or just trying to navigate yourself through a hike or a mountain pass or something like that.
Okay. So you're talking navigations. You're talking a compass, right?
Yeah,
We're not
yeah.
talking like a. This wasn't a GPS watch where it gave you coordinates.
No, at that point, I don't believe there were watches with GPS in them.
Okay.
Now with smartphones, they've got that sort of thing where they connect the watch to the smartphone as well. But in these scenarios, I don't think that that's such a good thing. I would actually steer clear of any kind of connection with computers or even satellites and things like that. I don't know. That's just me.
So your scenario is to completely come off the grid, right? You want to be untraceable and you want to be out in the woods somewhere. Is that what I'm getting at? Or what you're getting at?
Oh, if there's a zombie apocalypse, yes,
Okay.
then I would like to be untraceable.
Okay.
But if we're just talking about lost in the woods or civilization is gone, then it doesn't matter who finds me at that point.
Right. Okay. There is a dog right next to me as well, so you might have heard the growling. So you can hear. This is going to be a great episode, full of with dogs and dog noises. You've got Bennett breathing, and then my dog Frank growling at probably nothing because that's what he does. But anyway, let's continue. So yeah, we're talking about zombie apocalypse watches as of right now, and the Pathfinder is definitely one of them. So here's my question to you: how do you know that the battery is fresh in your Pathfinder?
So that's one of the problems, and that's actually why that watch is not on my current list of
Okay.
watches that I would want to have with me, or would suggest somebody look into for purchasing if that's the kind of watch they're looking for. Uh, so right now, I actually have that being replaced by the G-Shock, either the either the Mudmaster, and
Okay.
there's an amazing Mudmaster that has altimeter, barometer, depth, all these functions and things like that. It's around $800, I think, is the MSRP for
That's
that
what I thought.
Mudmaster, but it's like their top of the line Mudmaster. And that particular watch is going to be solar. It's going to be charging a capacitor with a solar cell that's on the dial of the watch.
Got it. So you chose Casio. I actually chose a Seiko Prospects, but we'll go on from there. Okay, so talk to us about this watch. Why would you choose this one with obviously with the solar capability, but why specifically this one and not any other G-Shock?
Well, the Mudmaster actually uses special, I guess, use of extra gaskets
Okay.
uh, to make sure that the watch is even more durable in situations where we're going to have lots of vibration, impact, and possibly even things that will damage O-rings and gaskets. Things like alcohols and corrosive elements, corrosive liquids. you want to make sure that your gaskets are still intact, but you also need to make sure that through vibration and impact, the watch is still going to be water resistant, and in their case, mud resistant, and all of these things that the shock resistance of those watches is unbelievable. But that's the one particular difference with the Mudmaster line is that they have multiple gaskets in place, and they have gaskets you wouldn't normally find gaskets, and stronger, larger. Just it's overkill for making a watch that should remain water resistant for a long period of time, regardless of the environment that you're using it in or the things you're putting it through. That paired with the solar recharging is something that I think is pretty cool and would be very important in a situation where you can't just stroll down to the local watchmaker in the mall and have them swap out a battery.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about the whole water resistance or the whole shock resistance thing, specifically with the quartz watches and specifically with these G-Shocks. Because I know actually very little about it because like I said, I wasn't really very much interested in the G-Shocks or anything that is kind of sort of like this when it comes to quartz. If it's quartz, I mean, my entire kind of philosophy on watches in terms of like what I like. I love them to be like utility style, but I also have a little bit of a preference in look. Like I would never really wear something like this, with the exception of apparently a zombie apocalypse. But let's talk about the shock resistance because we all understand what rubies do and what jewels do. Well, if we don't understand, we'll actually touch up on that topic a little bit later. But basically, rubies and jewels are shock resistance when it comes to the mechanical movement. But when it comes to a quartz movement, I mean, you've got the quartz crystal, right? You've got like a little microchip in there, like a little micro board in the battery. What other components of there are damageable, and what are they doing inside these G-Shocks that's so different than the traditional, let's say, I don't know, just regular Casio, like a calculator watch or something like that. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, first, the rubies or jewels in a watch, in a mechanical watch, they're not there for shock resistance at all.
I thought they were for really?
No,
Okay, I thought it was for okay, never mind. Or is it lubrication then?
it's for lubrication purposes.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Well, I need to talk to the watchmaker that told me that they were there for shock resistance. So
There are a couple of jewels that are in the escapement,
okay, maybe that's what he meant.
hold the balance wheel in place, that are mobile, meaning they can shift if you have an impact on the watch. The jewels will shift so that they don't break the pivots of that wheel. Prior to having those jewels mobile with a spring holding them down, you would actually just break the pivots of the watch, of the balance wheel, and then the watch wouldn't work anymore.
Got it. Okay.
So a lot of pocket watches didn't have shock resistance, which meant they didn't have these mobile jewels on the balance wheel. So once they started having wristwatches, you needed to have this extra shock resistance. So they added that system. And there's a few different variations on that system. Rolex currently has their own patented version of it. So does an ETA-owned company. So there's multiple companies. There used to be more. Now there's just a few of them. They make these shock settings for jewels, but that's only on your balance wheel that they're essential because it's a large, heavy wheel that in a shock, it can break the tiny little pivots. So for a mechanical watch, that's very important if you're wearing it on your wrist. Now, if you get into quartz watches, when you're talking about shock resistance, first, you want to make sure that an impact on the outside of the case does not dislodge or damage any components on the inside of the watch. So with the G-Shock, you're going to notice all kinds of basically body armor on your watch. Makes it into this rubberized cube almost. So that is very helpful. That will absorb most of the impact before it transfers into the case of the watch. And then from there, it's absorbed even further into an interior kind of shock absorption system inside the case before you could reach the movement. So any of the small moving parts or circuitry or anything like that should be relatively shock resistant. And In the case of a G-Shock, extremely shock resistant. The testing they went through to develop that is some of the craziest shock testing that exists in the watch world and probably in the electronics world in general. I don't think many products are tested as much as the G-Shock was tested. Um, so for that, that's very important. Then when you're talking about the gaskets, you need to make sure that in an impact you don't have components that can shift that are exterior components, like the buttons on the watch, the crown on the watch, the crystals, the case back, parts like that need to be protected in some manner so that they don't become compromised and allow humidity, water, dirt to get into the movement. It's very important that stuff stays outside of the watch.
Are they
So
actually using mineral crystal in these watches? What kind of crystals are they using?
uh, I believe it's going to be all mineral crystal when you're looking at G-Shock.
Hmm.
They might have some of the all metals might use a sapphire crystal possibly,
Right.
but the downside to a sapphire crystal, although it's almost completely scratch resistant. The downside to a very hard crystal like sapphire is that in an impact, it can shatter
Right.
because hard
Brittle.
means it's brittle,
Right.
essentially.
Right. Right.
Crack. So yes, less likely to scratch, but more likely to crack in a
Right.
substantial impact. So when you're thinking about those things, if you're looking for an outdoors watch that you're going to be smacking on things regularly, you wouldn't necessarily want to have a sapphire crystal on your G-Shock because you would probably crack it. Whereas that would render the timepiece useless.
Right.
If you just scratch the dial, it will be a little harder to read, but it will still be watertight and operational, which is what you really need in a situation like that.
Got it. So, what's interesting to me is the fact that like most luxury brands and most brands that really make like they make mechanical movements, there really aren't these types of safeguards that there are with the G-Shock. And the G-Shock is quite an exception, obviously, because there aren't really. I don't really even know if there is a competition to the G-Shock in the way that it's made. There's obviously competition in the whole like, yeah, we're shock resistant and we're drop resistant, and this and that. But the G-Shock really is the front runner. Like, if you think about mechanical timepieces, the only one that I really know that uses like a rubberized material that I don't even think has a really much of a use, but correct me if I'm wrong, is like the Royal Oak rubber clad. Do you know of any other watches that you like utilize any kind of rubbers or any kind of like shock resistant materials on the outside of the case?
Um, Not that I can think of off the top of my head. There are companies that utilize interior um, rings between the case and the movement
Hmm.
to increase the shock resistance. Those are pretty rare as well. But as far as things on the exterior of a watch, like rubber cladding or any kind of armor like that, you don't really see it in I guess, what you'd call the luxury realm of watches, as opposed to utilitarian. Yeah, I can't think of one. I'm sure if you know of one and you're watching, add it in the comments
Right.
and we'll look because I'd be interested to see. I bet there have been historically over the years. There have to have been some Swiss firms that came out with something that was designed for that.
Right. Yeah. So going back to the escapement. So tell us a little bit more about why it's important to protect the escapement. And we're talking about like when you read on certain old dials, like for example from the 60s, 70s, maybe even 80s, Inca block. Is that what we're talking about? Is that the shock resistance?
Inca Block is one of the trade names for shock resistant um, jewels that will hold the upper and lower pivot
Hmm.
of the balance wheel.
Okay.
So that's a trade name. So that would be like, having Coca-Cola on the dial of something. Coca-Cola comes with your Happy Meal. It's a trade name. and they all kind of utilize the same system. It's just the metal shock
Hmm.
that is slightly different. So you have jewels that are sandwiched together, uh, one and then another, and you'll have a hole where the pivot can come through one jewel and it's capped by the other jewel.
Okay.
This whole system can rock when your watch has a shock. So instead of the balance wheel trying to move and breaking this pivot, the whole system will be able to rock.
Got it. Okay.
You don't
So
break the pivot of the wheel.
got it. So
Uh,
it's like something comparable to, let's say, like architecture when people are building very large buildings or high rises. Like in the event of an earthquake, you don't want that building to not move. You actually want that building to sway. So if you've ever
exactly.
been in a skyscraper and you're on the top floor, if you're really, really paying attention, you might actually feel that the building is kind of swaying from one place to the other. And the reason
Yeah.
for that is, again, like it's the same thing as you were talking about mineral crystal and sapphire crystal. You want that little, like that malleability, that flexibility, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe roller systems for those to some of the taller buildings for them to actually sway on a roller system so that you have like a counterweight in the basement or something like that, and it will actually just kind of sway back and forth. So it's almost exaggerated when you're in some of those buildings with the most up to date standards for earthquake buildings.
Right. Okay. All right. So we've got our first choice. What do we have if we don't have, any of these the G Shocks? What would be the second choice here for you?
Well, I wanted to pick a few watches in different price points and for different types of collectors. So that Mudmaster that I like is pretty pricey. It's up there. I think it's 800 is the MSRP. Um, you can find them for less, obviously, on like Amazon or through some uh, other retailers and things like that. But there's also the Range Master, which is much more affordable. It's down in like the 300 range for the MSRP. So
Okay.
that one's a great option if you don't need all the bells and whistles, and it's also uh, going to be better on battery life. So it's going to take less solar charging. So if you live in a place like Seattle and you don't see the sun that often, the range the oh yeah range man the range man will actually be better for you because it won't require so much solar charging to actually keep it running.
Got it. Okay. All right. So we've got our Casios. We've got our couple selections here. I mean, obviously, it sounds like the Range Man is pretty comparable. It's just less features, less like robustness, I guess. Would you say something like that?
It won't have all the extra gaskets and things that go into the case design of the Mudmaster.
Hmm.
Uh, the the other differences will be some of the functions. It's a little more of a basic level G Shock. You're still going to have the timer functions, and I think you still even have like temperature and barometer. There might even be one of them that has the depth if you're a diver, which I think is a really cool feature to have on a watch. Extra redundancy when you're diving is always a big bonus, which
Yeah.
is one you're not going to find with a Swiss, a mechanical watch that you go
Right.
diving. You're you're not going to find a depth gauge unless you go for. There's a few watches out there that have them, but they're pretty rare.
Right. And when you're in a survival situation, that's actually supremely important because if you go a little too deep, let's say if you have oxygen with you, and if you're going a little too deep, you actually might die. So it's very important to have a depth gauge and know, like, because survival in many situations is risk management, right? Or risk mitigation. You want to be in the least risky place and you want to kind of surround yourself with like the least amount of opportunities to die. Is that fair to say?
I'd say so.
Right. So I think one of the safeguards is if you have a depth meter or a depth gauge and you are doing some free diving, if you have the skill to do some free diving and get yourself some lunch, dinner, breakfast, whatever, then yeah, it sounds like a pretty important feature.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Um,
Go ahead.
from there, I mean, I'd step it up if you're looking for looking to be in the mechanical watch realm,
Hmm.
I think an obvious choice is the Deep Sea Dweller
That's so
by
funny
Rolex.
because that's exactly what I thought.
Yeah, you can't, you just can't find a beefier, uh, more solidly built watch than that. I think personally, um, it's unbelievable that they're able to construct a regular production watch that can go almost 13, what is it, 13,000 meters?
I think it's well. Let's check. Let's we
Is it
have that
meters or
pulled up.
feet that they're, it's very deep.
Yeah, yeah. You're not going to go to those depths. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
And if
the
you do,
chance.
you're probably dead. Someone threw you off. You got whacked or something like that. So
Oh, yeah.
let's pull it up. So here's actually a picture of the dial here. Let me switch screens here. So there's a picture right there. So it's
Almost
12. Yeah,
13,000, 3,900 meters.
right. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. The pressures with that type of depth are absolutely enormous. And
Yeah.
you will die with those kind of pressures.
Yeah. So just thinking about that type of pressure and how much engineering had to go into building an extraordinarily solid case and case back, very thick crystal. Uh, Everything has to function
Right.
at that. You can't have any uh, compression of the case in such a way that it would lead the movement to be touched by any part of the case or warped by any part of the case warping. Uh, you also have to have the bezel still functioning. So everything has to be designed in such a way that it's extremely resistant to the pressures at that depth so that it still functions flawlessly. So I think that's a wildly overbuilt watch, and it would be a solid choice for something to have if you didn't know when you'd be able to, get service on a watch in the near future. That would probably be a good bet. That one will be built solidly, and you won't have issues for a long time.
Right. So basically, next time there's some kind of an epidemic or a pandemic or anything like that, you should probably gear up to buy your next Sea Dweller. Because, if it's coming fresh from the factory, because Rolex has stopped production. So you want that last one, right? You want that one that is freshly serviced, fresh out of commission, or into commission, rather, so that you don't have to worry about servicing costs when the world is coming to an end.
Or you hop on Crown and Caliber.
That's right. That's right.
They
There you go.
serviced it right before you got it, so everything's perfect.
Right. Okay. Good play.
Fresh gaskets, pressure tested, and that is you have to have special equipment to pressure test that watch.
Right.
It's a special machine that you purchase from Rolex just so that you can service, as a watchmaker, just so that you can service those particular watches, the Deep Sea Dweller. The special machine designed just for that watch when it came out.
Now, are we talking about a machine that is actually able to, like, I guess manufactures them? Maybe not the right word, but basically manufacture those types of pressures or achieve those types of pressures. Is that what you're trying to do? Is that what you're trying to say? Why the machine has to come from Rolex?
You have to, yeah, you have to be able to test to a certain depth when you're servicing those watches. And prior to that watch, Rolex had one requirement of a certain pressure testing machine that was required in your workshop to work on the dive watches.
Mm-hmm.
But then with the Deep Sea Dweller, it was a whole new realm of depth there. So there was a new requirement put into place for a different piece of equipment that you have to have for that particular watch. So if you're getting that service, they should have the right equipment if they're authorized by Rolex to do that kind of work. They'll have the right equipment to test it and get all the right gaskets back in the proper place and proper part numbers and everything to make sure that it's watertight, and they can prove it with that.
Let's just put something into perspective here. Okay, so one of the tallest mountains here in the Southern California area is Mount Baldy, and I think it's somewhere around like 10, 11,000 feet up in the air, the peak. And this watch is rated at 12,800 feet. Now, if you're at 12,800 feet, if you've ever been at elevation, it's a little bit more difficult to breathe. The pressure is a little bit different. I mean, there's actually less atmospheric pressure. So you are in a situation where, yes, there's less oxygen, but the pressure itself is not the type of pressure that you would be feeling at sea level. Now, let's do the opposite of that. When you're going into the water, and I don't know if you guys have ever carried a gallon of water, how heavy that is. Imagine the pressures at 12,800 feet. Like this watch is basically it's almost like an impermeable like rock. Like it's incredible what they've been able to achieve. And on top of that, it's got a helium escape valve. So there are moving parts within that case, and they are still able to maintain the structural rigidity and prevent like the crystal from popping off, the case back from becoming warped. That's an insane achievement, an absolutely insane achievement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
The
go ahead.
the weight of just a few feet of water on top of you is far more than the atmosphere
Exactly.
at sea level.
Right.
It's pretty insane to think about a watch going down 13,000 feet.
Yeah. If you go on YouTube and if you look up like videos, like there's actually a video that was recently done by what's the little guy from Top Gear, Richard Hammond, and he is talking about water pressures, and the whole thing was like talking about a dam. And what they did was they took a barrel, like a metal barrel. Usually, like what would you see in those types of barrels? Like maybe petroleum or something like that. So they took a barrel like that, and they started basically at sea level or at whatever altitude they were at, and they started dropping the barrel ever so slightly, and you could see that barrel contort and completely like just collapse upon itself with pressures that are definitely not 12,800 feet. I mean, we're talking about like several hundred feet. So yeah, I mean, we're beating a dead horse here, but it's crazy to me that there is a watch in production that is so kind of under the radar. Like nobody really knows, not nobody, but like for the most part, people that I've known that are wearing the Sea Dweller have no idea what it's capable of. Like my cousin has the James Cameron version. If I talk to him right now about what this watch is able to achieve, he'll be like, "Okay, that's cool," and then we'll change the topic of the conversation because it's just like it's unfathomable how strong these things are. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's my excitement for it. I'm glad that we agree because I pulled up Sea Dweller as one of my choices as well. But let's move on. Let's go to the next one.
From there, I think you step it up into the billionaire realm. If you're looking for if you happen to be a billionaire and you
Okay.
are watch and listen right now, then this is the watch for you. If you're looking for a crazy bug out watch, uh, it is Richard Mille um, RM 2501 or something like that, I believe.
All right, let's take a look. 2501.
2501, I think.
Okay, I'm looking up RM 2501 and I'm getting refrigerators. So Richard Mille 25. There we go. -01.
So this watch has got to be $1 million plus for this
Okay.
particular timepiece,
All right.
and it has an incredible amount of uh, functions packed into a fully mechanical watch. Everything from simpler stuff like a compass, but then stepping up that compass with a level and a mirror with a sight line, the extra additional components that can kind of clip onto the case so that you can make use of those functions in such a way that they could actually help you navigate. So I believe it's a manually wound chronograph movement. It might even be a tourbillon, be my guess, because I mean, Richard only does tourbillons, really. That's their thing.
Yeah, it does say tourbillon. Yeah, with 24-hour display. Okay.
Yeah, so manual winding tourbillon chronograph, which tourbillon chronograph is incredible to begin with. Then you add all of these wild materials that went into the movement. Grade 5 titanium bridges, which is just insanity to machine those kinds of tight tolerance parts and keep everything in tolerance, all your tools still sharp while you're cutting, and get everything done within the tolerances that are required for a mechanical watch like this. But then you add these wild features onto it that it's almost like if you thought of somebody before electronics coming up with features to add to a watch, and they actually added them all mechanically. You'll also notice there's a little canteen
Right.
looking screw down uh, pusher on the top right.
Yep.
So up by like 2 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And that is actually a little canister where there are some water purifying tablets. So
That's
if you find
ridiculous.
yourself in a situation where you only have gross water to drink, something that you're concerned might have high bacteria levels or viruses in the water, you can actually drop a tablet into the water and you'll have fresh water.
Okay. All right. Well, now we know. That's I was thinking like that little canteen there was for a little bit of scotch or something like that, or whatever.
I mean, once you use your water tablets, your water purifying tablets out of it, maybe on the next journey you fill it
Maybe.
with scotch.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, if you're buying $1 billion, I mean, if you're a billionaire and you're buying $1 million watch, you might as well pour some like 25 or 50-year-old Macallan in there. And,
Yeah,
that if you're about to die, if it's the end of the world, why not go out with a bang with a very, very nice scotch? Who needs water,
yeah,
right? All right. Well, this watch is
yeah.
absolutely insane. I mean, this watch, to be honest with you, I don't really even have much to say about it because it's kind of silly. It's kind of really, really silly because if you think about it, like the Casio does exactly the same thing, but obviously that kind of proves to you that the world of luxury is always going to exist because there's always going to be a buyer for something, even as something as silly as this watch. And I thought it was silly because I was looking at kind of like the website there, and Sylvester Stallone is on there, and I love how he's like either the ambassador or I don't know, maybe they use them as like some kind of like a professional service, like a consultant on designing and building the watch from all the experience that he has on being a fake survivalist in the Rambo movies. And then all the what are the new ones called? The Expendables.
Yeah, there's a bit of a tie-in with Rambo for that particular timepiece.
Right. Yeah, it's funny, like Stallone himself is kind of wishy-washy on the watches. At first he was doing the whole Panerai thing, and now he's moving up in the game. And now he's doing the whole Richard Mille thing. So very, very funny, very interesting. Um, if you're a billionaire and if you really need a survival watch, well, there you go. If you're not into it's funny because it kind of actually looks a little bit like a Seiko. I mean, not a Seiko, a Casio. It's got that G-Shocky vibe.
Oh yeah, because they're using materials on the exterior of the watch that hopefully will make it more shock resistant as well. Using super light materials too.
Right.
The lighter the watch, the better it's going to be for shock resistance. And that actually brings me to my bug out watch,
Okay.
which is the Weiss Watch Company Ultralight.
Nice. Very nice plug. All right. Let's show the watch. Let's do this. Let's go back to. Or are you going to pick up? Actually, all right. You've got it prepared. Okay. Perfect. All right. We've talked about this watch before. It's a spectacular watch, but now you get to do a sales pitch, and you need to kind of give us an idea as to why that's your bug out watch.
Fully titanium case, grade 5 titanium, and then the movement is mechanical, manually wound. So it's a low maintenance kind of movement. Anything manually wound is going to be much lower maintenance than an automatic. And then the bridges, so the black bridges that are in here, are all made from a super strong, lightweight aluminum alloy. So the entire watch is quite a bit more lightweight than our regular version with steel and brass. So it's much more shock resistant, and then also corrosion resistance. If you're really stuck out there with no running water or sink to rinse your watch off with, you're going to have to deal with corrosion.
Yeah.
So titanium's a good material.
Okay. So stainless steel, you're telling me that obviously stainless steel, the reason that it's used so prolific. Okay, I'm having a hard time talking today, but that's also not a surprise. The reason it's used so often is because of its resistance to corrosion. I mean, obviously stainless steel doesn't rust. So what kind of corrosion are we talking about here? Because there's a level that stainless steel is not fully impermeable. So talk
Yeah,
about the
stainless steel
corrosive.
does rust.
What's that?
Stainless steel will rust.
Right, right, right. Okay. So
Uh, so what you're dealing with is the level of corrosion resistance.
okay.
There are certain stainless steels that will resist corrosion better than others. So, like 316 stainless steel is very corrosion resistant, but still retains its machinability. So you are able to cut the parts to the exact dimensions you want in a relatively easy way with standard tooling. You can make the cases. You can also polish the cases and get the nice finishes you want to get on them. And you have really great corrosion resistance. If you want to improve the corrosion resistance, there are other stainless steel alloys that have corrosion resistance in, say, like warm, salty baths or acidic solutions. If you were to drop your watch in a warm acid, there are other stainless steels that will be better than 316.
Got it. See, you're thinking ahead because I didn't put into kind of play here or kind of considered the fact that there might be some kind of evil supervillain that you might be going against that might
Yeah.
actually place you in some kind of a corrosive environment. So good thinking. Very, very smart thinking.
So if you were actually going to be stuck on an island in the tropics around salt water and it's very warm all the time and you're dealing with salt all the time,
Right.
it would be wise to have a titanium watch as opposed to a stainless steel watch.
Fair.
Because in all the little cracks and crevices where the case back meets the case of the watch, where the crown kind of touches the watch, all those little areas, they're a little harder to clean. Some are impossible to clean. You can't open up the case back of your watch and wipe the salt away that may have gotten in there near the gasket. So if you open up vintage Rolexes, oftentimes you'll find that there is corrosion that has taken place in between the case back and the case, or in between the bezel and the case.
Right.
And sometimes it can actually lead to the watch not being watertight anymore.
Right. Yeah.
You'll get pitting in there that you just can't get the watch to seal again, which is really unfortunate. That's from, on a vintage watch, that could be like 50 years of salt and body oils and things getting underneath the case back and sitting there. With a titanium watch, it will resist that pitting more.
Okay. As a germaphobe, I think I've become far more appreciative of titanium watches now because oil's gross, dude. That's disgusting.
Yeah, well, I mean, keeping your watch clean is going to prolong the life of it.
Right. Okay.
Just
Well,
wiping it down, general hygiene on your watch is a good thing to practice,
right.
so that not only it's clean and safe. I mean, wipe it down. Keep COVID-19 off of it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, they are saying that COVID-19 is it lives the longest on stainless steel. So do your part. Wash your watch, and just in general, wash up. Like, have some decency. Like, go wash your hands. We're all in this together. So yeah, don't be gross. All right. Anything else in terms of the watch, the Weiss titanium watch that you want to tell us about?
Oh, that's
your
my
sales pitch.
adventure watch right there. That's the perfect timepiece for the most shock resistance, most reliability, longest lasting, least amount of service necessary, materials that just really are overkill
Right.
for a watch these days.
Okay. All right. Fair. Do you have anything else? Any other watches that you want to throw out there, or should we go on to my picks?
I think for me, that's a pretty, we're going from a $300 G-Shock all the way up to a $1 million chronograph Tourbillon with water purifying tabs.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, look, you definitely threw a wild card in there with this whole Richard Mille thing, and
yeah.
You know what's funny? Like, going back to it, what's funny about the watch is the fact that it has a level on it. I don't know if you noticed it, but on the bottom right there.
Yeah, so the level is actually, when you're dealing with a compass watch,
Right.
you need to be able to hold your compass level,
Right.
for one. Then you are also going to need a sight line. So a lot of the more inexpensive watches, you might find a Timex out there that has a compass on it. Or maybe you're very, I don't know what the right word for this is, but thrifty, and you use the sun and the shadow it creates on the hand
Right.
of the watch, and you use it more as a sundial. That will work too.
Okay.
But if you're looking for really accurate navigation, you're going to have a sight line, a raised sight line. So you'll see in one of those pictures, it actually has a flip up device that will give you your sight line. And you're going to need a level so that you know you're holding your compass level.
Right.
That little level is on there. It's for taking your compass readings.
Very accurate. Very accurate. Like whenever I read a compass, I would just make sure that the needle was as level as it possibly could be. But I guess if you have
Yeah,
$1 billion and $1 million to spend on a watch, you don't have the time for that. You gotta get moving because people are probably going to be after that watch.
yeah, and I think if you're looking at a military compass, military approved compass
Hmm.
for the U.S. military, it's going to have to. I'm pretty sure they have to have those parts on the compass for it to be approved. You know?
See, the thing is I'm decent when it comes to using a compass. Like I understand the principles of it, I know how to use it, but I also can get lost within a circle. So I'm not the best navigator. So if anything, decides to hit the fan, I will hope that someone is a decent navigator. I have other very good skills that would probably make me a benefit to a survival situation, but when it comes to navigation, not the guy to look for. So let's move on from there, I guess.
Yeah,
uh,
compass is good, but the sun is very easy.
yeah,
Um, Again, if you live in Seattle, you
that's a
could
little
have trouble.
tougher. Right,
Yeah,
right, exactly. Yeah. Or in the event, like again, going back to the volcano videos that I was watching earlier, if you've got ash and you've got no reference as to where the sun is, you're going to need a compass. But then also,
yeah.
like the volcanoes spew a lot of metals, so your compass might be kind of incapable at that point. So, anyway,
I don't know how that works. I do know, however, if you happen to be traveling to another part of the world, you might need a different compass.
that's right. Yeah,
You are dealing with magnetic poles,
that's
so
right.
things
Man,
will change.
we're like such scientists. Watch scientists. Is that a thing? It's not.
Yeah, it will be a horologist.
Okay, a horologist. Got it. Okay,
Yeah, yeah, the study of
horology.
time, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Is it the proper? I know I'm kind of teasing you guys because I've had a couple of comments of people saying that I mispronounce things, but I know it's not horology, it's horology, and I know it's not a horologist, it's a horologist. But I'm just having a little bit of fun. So, with that being said, I guess we can move over to my selections. You ready for those?
Yeah,
Okay. So my thing is whenever you are in a survival situation, you need a couple of different things. Number one, you need reliability, right? So you got to make sure that that watch is really robust and it's not going to get damaged easily. So that was one of the choices, or that was one of the factors that I kind of rolled into my selections. Number two, you want a little bit of robustness in the sense that, like, if you have to use it for something other than a watch, you can use it, kind of sort of like your example of the Richard Mille. And number three, they're just cool. So we're gonna base that those three factors on, or that's what my decisions were based on, is those three factors. So number one, I kind of went against the grain, and I didn't go directly to the Sea Dweller first, although it is one of my top choices. I'd probably wear the Sea Dweller because that would be not my number one choice, just based off of like how robust it is and how excited, obviously, I got about it earlier in the episode. But if you don't want a Sea Dweller, here is my choice, and my choice here is right there. Can you see it? The Omega Ploprof, which is a ridiculous looking watch and also a ridiculous watch in every kind of sense. It's similar to the Sea Dweller because it is a ridiculously capable a diving watch. Yeah, it's a similar thing, but a different type of design. You can see there the original 1970s Ploprof that they developed to break records. So the Ploprof, essentially the same kind of description that you had for the Sea Dweller. It's just a very robust, uh, tough watch that you could use for diving. And what's cool is it comes on these beads of rice bracelets that you can rest assured are not going to fall apart in the event that you need to use that watch in a situation where maybe you've fallen or something like that. Because um, I'm a little scared of not bracelets, bands and things of that sort when it comes to these types of watches, which is cool because in the G-Shock that you showed us earlier, they're kind of integrated, right? It's like one piece.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so
It attaches to the case, the case kind of shock absorbing shell.
right,
Really.
right, yeah. So the Ploprof is not that obviously because you can change the bracelet. You could do the same thing with the Sea Dweller, but the Sea Dweller bracelets, I mean Rolex bracelets, the newer, the modern ones, and some of the older ones as well. They're a little bit more flimsy, but I've never had a problem with a bracelet having any kind of issues breaking, stretching obviously an issue, but uh, in terms of like failure, I've never seen a Rolex bracelet ever fail. Spring bars are a different, obviously, animal if you're not putting in the right spring bar, if you're not putting in like a genuine or a good quality spring bar, if you're using something that's just Chinese and you ordered off Amazon or something like that, I wouldn't really trust that. So before a survival situation, make sure that the parts and make sure that the person that serviced that watch is credible because you don't want anything to fail. So yeah, that's my first choice is the Omega Ploprof, just because it's kind of ridiculous. All of these watches are kind of ridiculous in some sense, um, and it's such a weird looking thing. I don't know if have you ever seen one in person, like anyone actually wearing one in person?
I I have a soft spot for the Ploprof.
Okay, tell us
Really
why
like.
you have a soft spot.
Um, I have one issue with the new version of it, and that is the fact that it is no longer front-loading case, meaning the original version has a solid case, and the case back.
All right, so we're back. We had a little bit of technical difficulty. Apparently, the world is coming to an end, including our internet. So we're back. Luckily, we've got our redundancy in place, and we're going to finish up this episode. So real quickly, what we're going to do is we're just going to discuss some of my choices, and we'll wrap up the episode from there and give you guys a good idea as to which watch to buy right away so that in the event of a catastrophe, a disaster, an epidemic, pandemic, whatever, you've got the right piece of kit on your wrist. So my choice was the Omega Ploprof. Cameron, you were kind of in the middle of talking about like kind of the issues about the Ploprof. So I'll really quickly kind of tell you guys what my issue with the Ploprof is recently what the Ploprof has had is they've had a basically a display back version. And the display back version, it kind of takes away from the whole point of the Ploprof. And Cameron, you were saying that basically it wasn't a front loading movement from there on in. So basically now there is a case back that is a screw out case back. So it kind of, the modern versions of the Ploprof are not as, we'll say, great as the original versions. So with that being said, the other watches that I had were actually pretty much almost identical with the exception of the Ploprof. I had Casio G-Shocks that I put on the list. Although for me, mechanical, especially manual wind, is probably the better choice. Now, obviously, if the Sea Dweller had a manual wind movement, it would be, in the survival situation, probably a little bit better than the automatic. But the automatic movements in the Sea Dwellers are so bulletproof that it really doesn't make that much of a difference. And if you're out and surviving for like 5 or 6 years, whatever the service intervals are, you got bigger issues to worry about than the service of your Rolex Sea Dweller. So with that being said, I think we're pretty much ready to wrap this whole thing up. So Cameron, go ahead, take this opportunity, let people know where to find you. You guys are still operating. Obviously, you're still inside the workshop. You're still building watches, still sending watches out. So we're almost at the peak of this whole thing, hopefully, and we're all going to get back to business soon. So go ahead, do your plug.
Yeah, I'm still working all by my lonesome at Weiss Workshop, Weiss Watch Workshop in Los Angeles. And you can hop on our webpage and check out our watches. You can also hop on Instagram and look us up at Weiss Watch Company, or you can find me at Cameron M. Weiss on Instagram. And hop on our website and check out that ultralight. It's the perfect watch, and where I'm actually finishing up the last few of them right now.
Very nice.
It's a limited edition of 100 pieces, so once they're gone, and I'm working on the last ones right now.
Great. Okay. Perfect. Get those titanium watches, people. You're going to need them. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is I'll just do my plugs here, and then we'll wrap it up. So you can find me on Instagram at Road Stories Mike. If you want to tune into some of my old work, check out the Road Stories podcast on iTunes and pretty much everywhere, as well as On Time Podcast, again, on iTunes and pretty much everywhere. Cheers.